I think everyone's had a fair share of data ingestion for today across all of the different talks, so I'll try to keep it crisp in the interest of time. Um, Sticking to the topic of data ingestion, I was actually just having a discussion with Ashish as well, that there's just so much data that we get to ingest every single day, whether it be through different news sources, whether it be through speaking with different people. Um, and it's just there are a ton of things that tend to influence our decision making, right? So what I wanted to actually discuss, and it probably be a sort of open-ended discussion, is how can we actually stick to the fundamentals? How can we drill down to the truth to ensure that all of the decision making that we do in our day-to-day lives, or whether it be in our business, or whether it be when we discuss with clients, etc., is grounded in the truth and is based on first principles. First principles essentially means reasoning not by analogy, but by the absolute fundamentals and truths. So whether it be in physics or math, what we've done in college or where we've studied, first principles means drilling down to the very fundamental and the truth, right? After a series of questions of asking yourself why, you come down to the truth, and then you reason up from there. The normal way we tend to conduct our lives is by analogy, right? With so much information coming, whether it be from the Western world, whether it be from India, this and that, we tend to think that, okay, so this seems good, why not iterate a little on this and try to go along this direction? Now, the problem with that is that you're almost always doing a local optimization, right? You'd say that, fine, this is like this, but what if I actually try to do something different with this? And I'll try to get some sort of market share over here, et cetera, et cetera. But essentially what you're doing is saying that, fine, this is an already existing business premise or something that's happening. And if you're building around that, it almost always tends to be a local maxima that you will achieve. Thinking by first principles, by drilling down to the fundamental truth, enables you to actually come up with sort of conclusions that tend to somehow create global maxima. I'll try to explain some of this through our journey as Shipsy, as an early stage startup, right? The kind of difficulties that are faced, the kind of data ingestion that happens through various different sources, and what we had to actually keep in mind while making fundamental decisions about the direction in which the company was heading. So after actually graduating from campus and working at a bank, started off Shipsy about a year and a half back with the premise of solving the problem of visibility in the supply chain. Right? So me and my co-founder, who was my colleague at Deutsche Bank, both of us always had problems, sending things from point A to B, or whenever we'd order online, we'd never get complete visibility on the whereabouts of the parcel. We'd get delivery windows that were 4 or 5 days wide. There were many missed attempts and a number of problems over there. So how we actually, our assumption of the solution, right? So we saw this as a problem. Now we thought that, fine, what could be a potential solution? And back, about a year and a half back, we were getting a lot of ideas from the West, actually, and some of our friends and some angel investors also used to say that, okay, look at this startup. So Ship was one of the startups that time that was actually doing pretty well. It raised about $50 million. And the idea was that, okay, can a similar sort of idea work for India, right? Essentially, what we were doing was that, fine, we started off with a problem, but the solution was sort of driven by analogy. That, okay, so this is something that's happening in this particular place. Why not try to customize it and do something similar for India? So we started off as a first mile aggregator. We thought that solving for the problem of visibility meant giving the customer, the end user, a platform, an app by which they could send anything, anywhere, get complete visibility for end-to-end movement through the middle miles to the last mile, complete end-to-end visibility. We interacted with a lot of the end users, and this was definitely a problem, right? That they would never actually get to know of a reliable courier service provider or a logistics company, whether you're an SME or an individual user, with which you can actually send your goods. So we started working on that, but what we very soon realized was that how things happen in the West and how things happen in India are very, very different, right? So in the West, you have existing courier companies that are very good, right? So essentially, you have the likes of FedEx, UPS, all of these guys who've been in the industry for years and years and years, who've pioneered the technology and can actually make very good decisions using the data that they're generating in their system. The reliability is present. Now, that was a problem with India. So essentially, what would happen was that we'd give a promise to the end customers based on the promise that we got from the logistics companies, right? Okay, so given this pin code combination, it would be delivered in, say, 5 days max, right? And what would happen is that the logistics company would falter on their promise. They would say that, boss, I don't know what's happening. Kahin to hoga, koi leke ghar chala gaya hoga. Many, many different excuses, right? And finally, we were the ones that had to face the customers, right? So what we very soon realized was that, fine, first mile might be a problem, but the fundamental problem was the logistics companies in India were actually not able to live up to their SLAs, to live up to their promise, were not able to make better decisions using the data generated in their system. We took a further step back because this time we actually wanted to do the analysis in a very fundamental manner. So we asked ourselves that, fine, logistics companies seem to have this problem. But is this problem prevalent anywhere else? Are there other dependencies which would hamper something that we're trying to do? And what we realized was that supply chain companies in general tend to have this problem. And the reason why this is the case is supply chain, the industry itself, has something very peculiar about it. It's made up of a very large number of very small moving parts, right? Whether it be a large logistics company processing about 500,000 consignments a day, some of the clients that we work with, right? So for them, one consignment is 1 out of 500,000, right? That's a very small percentage. But for the person who's actually sent it, that one is his everything, his or her everything, right? If you're sending something to your sister, to your parents, to anyone, that one for you is your everything. So there was this mismatch, right? For the person sending, that one is their everything, but for the logistics or the supply chain company, it's made up of a very large number of very small moving parts. So we realized that, fine, fundamentally the supply chain industry is actually composed of this problem, right? So can we make a platform that actually enables them to make better decisions using the data, right? With the clear objectives of improving operational efficiency and improving their service levels. If you look at what happened, say, for example, with the hyperlocal startups and the industry that was bubbling about a year back, right, was that everyone started to jump onto this theme, right? That, fine, let's try to deliver food because there was a problem. Clearly, there was a problem over there that if you wanted to order something from somewhere, there was no reliable and fast way to deliver your food. And there were a bunch of companies that came about, and I remember like last year this time when we were in Gurgaon, right in front of one of the supermarkets, there would be like 5 different companies just putting the delivery boys over there, right? And I asked myself that, wait, what exactly is happening, right? Because everyone seems to be jumping onto this bandwagon, right? And everyone wants to just put delivery boys, right? And investors also, they were like, okay, this is very interesting. You should try to do this, etc., etc. My problem was that, look, fine, this could be an interesting thing to solve, but if you are just delivering food, see, the food delivery industry or the hyperlocal industry is not a bad industry to be in, but if that's the only industry you're in, then there's a problem because there are peaks, right? You have breakfast, lunch, dinner, right? And then there are peaks. So essentially, capacity utilization then becomes a very big problem, right? And that's what started happening, right? So then when the actual funding slowdown came, right? Companies started realizing that, look, we're building capacity in a time where there is already so much capacity that's existing. I mean, the only thing that really happened was delivery boys that were earning otherwise, say, 13 to 14,000 rupees a month started earning like 28 to 30,000 rupees a month, right? Which is totally unsustainable, right? And companies, the investors also started asking that, okay, how exactly are we going to be profitable, right? And then the solution started coming that, okay, so now we need to make sure that we do something between peaks. So then they started going by the analogy that, fine, now we want to do something between peaks, so let's try to deliver e-commerce parcels, right? So then what you're actually saying is, fine, I want to also deliver e-commerce parcels, which means that, okay, I need to set up hubs, right? Now, to build the entire hub and spoke model, e-commerce can't run a point-to-point model. It's not a point-to-point optimization. It's a complete hub and spoke optimization, right? So the realization of the fundamental problem was that the food delivery industry is not a bad industry to be in, but if that's the only industry you're in, then there is a problem because of the peaks. And now, if you want to actually mix it with e-commerce or mix it with courier or mix it with any other sort of things, you need to actually develop a hub and spoke model, right? So our view was that, look, there are already so many courier companies, logistics. There are about like 1,300 courier companies in India, right? Guys you might not have even heard of, the tier 2, tier 3 folks. And they have their shops at every nook and corner. They have people that are sitting empty, that are just, sitting idle through the day, just collecting goods at one or the other time. So India has this characteristic that there is already a lot of capacity there that there is existing in the industry, right? So can we actually make better use of the capacity, right, by data-driven decision-making? So this was actually a bit around the hyperlocal boom and the corresponding decline that happened, and the realization of the fundamental problem. The problem with themes, right? So if you look at, Peter Thiel is actually one of the sort of big advocates that why themes are actually not very good, right? Because themes are actually driven by analogy, right? So there was a point in our journey as well where investors were like, Acha, why don't you do bike delivery? I'll fund you for bike delivery. And I was like, why? Right? Like, if you, like, fine, bike delivery might, bike taxi, sorry. Bike taxi might be very interesting, but fundamentally, again, you still have the same problems, right? If you're doing bike taxi, then you have people traveling, say, in the morning, and then you have people traveling in the evening, and then what exactly do you do in the middle? But there was a theme, right? There was a rush, right? And everybody just wanted to capture that pot of gold, right? That fine, there is some sort of opportunity over here in the bike taxi market. So why not just try to do that, right? Same was the thing with hyperlocal, companies, investors, angel investors alike used to say, yaar, you do this and I'll fund you, right? And what happened later was that, fine, there was a realization of the fundamental problem. Even now, we always tend to make this mistake, right? Because we ingest data from a lot of different sources. We look at themes, we look at interesting sectors, right? So what happens is we tend to ask that, okay, what is an interesting sector to be in? Right? And reasoning by that, saying that, okay, fine, now fintech is probably something that has some sort of momentum, and now there is a clean tech theme that's going on. And if we try to reason by that, okay, now this theme is interesting, let me try to actually figure out something that might be good to do in this theme. Again, it's local optimization, right? You're just going to go in the local optima, and once that theme sort of fades out, right, people are it's like going to go to something else then. So essentially, that is the problem with themes. You don't get to explore businesses that haven't been touched yet. So the question really is that how can we get to explore or come across different businesses that haven't been sort of founded yet? Peter Thiel actually asked this very interesting question, that what is something that you believe to be true that nobody else agrees with, right? And it's a very interesting question because it's saying that, fine, you have a conviction about something, you think that something is true, but almost everyone else doesn't think so, right? And if what you believe actually turns out to be true, then you found something, you founded a business that is truly, truly innovative. This actually worked very well for him in the current election, where he supported Trump. I mean, it's a clear indication, right? So almost everyone thought that, Trump, why would he come, right? And everyone thought that, fine, this is not going to happen, right? Trump cannot be president because of et cetera, whatever this and that reason. But as we all know what happened, right? That Peter Thiel made a very good bet, and it actually paid off very well for him. So that's a bit on the problem with themes and why we should actually try to go bottom up to see that, fine, fundamentally, what is a problem, right? Because a lot of times we get told that entrepreneurship is about taking risks, and I mean, we should ask ourselves that, fine, what exactly is entrepreneurship? It's essentially building something, building a product, and being paid to sell it, right? Does it mean building something risky? Does it mean building, taking excessive risks? No, definitely not. You could even have like, a pastry business or whatever it is, right? And it could be a very interesting business to be in. So that's a bit on the themes aspect. Very recently, I've always had this doubt about consulting companies, right? That, how can another company actually come in to, say, a manufacturing sector and advise their leaders on how to run their own business? Right? So we had consulting companies come to our campus for recruitment, and there's been a bunch of my friends in the consulting space, and I always sort of had this argument with them that how can you go and tell somebody who's been running his or her business for about 25, 30 years and tell them how to run their business? Essentially, the main premise on consulting is actually, put it very simply, brainstorming as a service, right? To put it extremely simply, it's just brainstorming as a service. And this is something that we miss in our day-to-day lives, right? In whatever we're doing, we fail to get someone to just critique us. I mean, all that we require is somebody to keep asking us, okay, why are you doing this? We'll say something, okay, then why this? Why this? Why this? Why this? And then this fundamentally comes down to the truth then, right? So basically, all that these guys do is interact with these top guys and structure up a set of questions that enable them to reach the truth. Because the fact of the matter is, the guys who are running the companies, they know best, right? What is good for their industry, what is something that is good. But creating direction where there is none, that is something that's really important. Going from 0 to 1, right? Building something on top of an existing already big company is, that's a different thing. Going from 0 to 1, creating structure where everything is completely unstructured is, I think, extremely difficult. And those of us who have early stage companies or startups would definitely understand this, because there's just so much, the investors are telling you something, your parents are telling you something else. And, we get advice from all different places that, why don't you do this? Why don't you try this? This seems to be interesting. We need to try to ensure that everything that we do is based on the fundamental truth, and that everything, all of the reasoning that we do, tries to come from the bottom up, that we go down to the truth and we start building up from there. Another set of discussion that I sort of often have with some of my flatmates and my colleagues from campus is that, why is India sort of lacking, I would say, when it comes to true innovation? Right? You see a bunch of companies coming up in the US, and I guess, I haven't actually come down to the sort of answer over there, but I think it goes deep down even in the way that we do our education, the way we spend time in schools, etc. It's mostly that, fine, we have to do this so that we get so-and-so marks, so that we get admission in this college. And essentially, it's just a set of consecutive local optima that we're trying to achieve. That if it's a school, then fine, you need to do well in 10 so that you get good admission in 11th standard, so that, fine, then you give JE, so even when you get good marks, you go into a department that is just categorized based on your rank. So if you get a certain rank, it's not like you choose your department. You're given a department based on the rank, right, in IIT, etc., etc. So I think that's why it becomes even more important for us to do this because we haven't been trained in that way, right? Fortunately for people abroad and in the West, they're given many open-ended problems, right? When some of us actually receive open-ended problems, it's like all hell breaks loose, right? Because then there's so many different things that can be done. And creating structure where there is none becomes a big problem. This slide is on always starting with why, right? This is actually one of the big sort of leadership experts. They have also touched upon this fact. And starting with why essentially means going down to the fundamental truth, making people believe in what you believe, right? Rather than saying what you're doing or how you're doing it, because the simpler thing to define about your business is what you're doing, right? So if you ask somebody, okay, what are you doing? They'll say that, fine, I am building this and I am selling this. How are you doing it is fine. I have a bunch of engineers that are working day and night and making this, blah, 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 blah. The most difficult part is, like, why are you actually doing it? What is your purpose? What is the mission, right? Why? What is the vision behind all of this? And what are you trying to achieve? And that often becomes very difficult to explain, right? But the point is that almost all successful people, businesses, all of those things, right? They get people to believe in the why, right? Why are they doing that? Like very recently, if you look at, what, political opinions aside, what's happened with demonetization right now, right? For whatever it's worth, it's been a big move. There's been a lot of people facing tremendous difficulties, right? Standing in queues, etc., etc. But we still haven't seen some sort of massive uproar. A poll was taken lately. I don't know the authenticity of the data over there, but essentially most of the people seem to be fine. That still this decision was the right decision, and it's somehow that people have been sort of molded into believing in what the leader has said. And same is the case with organizations. If you look at how to sort of motivate people, and this is again something that other early stage companies would sort of relate to, is how do you motivate people to work, right? Given that, fine, there are only so much of funds that's there, you can't use money as an incentive to actually get people to work. Given the constraints, right? How can you actually get people to believe in what you're doing and then give it your sweat and blood, right? Because if they're just doing it for the money, right, they'll do the normal 9 to 5, etc., and wo dil se kaam nahi aata hai, right? So essentially, this is again one part where I think we all need to focus on the why, right? If we get people to believe in what we believe, right, then it becomes a lot simpler when you do something new, right? To actually get people to buy that product or believe you, which is actually what Trump also did very well. He went to the fundamental of what people sort of think and tried to make them believe in that. Another sort of strategy that we implement at work is called Occam's razor, right? It's essentially trying to say that the decision that has the fewest number of assumptions tends to be the most efficient decision and tends to almost always be the correct decision to make. The least complex thing is correct. Another thing sort of that we do that might actually be useful for decision-making process, and that has been advocated by, I think, Salesforce and Oracle and the likes, is this process called V2MOM. V2MOM stands for, V stands for what is your vision, right? You start with the vision. The second V stands for what are your values, right? The M stands for methods. The O stands for obstacles, and the last M stands for the measures, right? So essentially, you need to start with the vision, right? That whenever you're embarking on a particular project, or whenever you're thinking on a particular line, if you want to enter a new vertical, or whether you want to enter a separate business, or whether you want to do anything else, you need to know the vision that, fine, what is my purpose? Why am I doing this? The values complement this. When you define your vision, you define that what exactly are your values that you're bringing to the table. The methods is the how, right? Method is saying that, fine, now given my purpose, given my vision, How am I going to achieve this? Obstacles denotes what is going to stop me from achieving my goals, right? So that you tend to sort of make sure that they don't come in your way. Measures is also very important because I think when we start off on something, sometimes we don't know what we want to achieve, right? So we start on something and it almost always remains something that, fine, I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this. But I think it's very important to know that how do you measure your achievement so that at least that when you've got there, right, you know that, fine, I have achieved what I wanted to achieve. So defining what is the sort of measure of achievement is very important. These are some of the sort of things that we use internally as well to ensure that decision making happens correctly. Um, the last slide that I wanted to discuss was fundamentally, I think whether it be in our day-to-day lives, when we talk to our friends, whether we talk to our customers, whether we talk to our investors, whatever it is, it fundamentally is about human psychology, right? If you drill down to the truth, right? So if you're talking to someone, right, and you want to convince that person, right, you need to know what matters most to that person, right? I think it was discussed in one of the earlier sessions that we had by Lalit, that what fundamentally matters to a businessman, a traditional Indian businessman, right, in your SaaS business, you want to go and sell something to someone, right? You might say that, fine, artificial intelligence, machine learning, blah, 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 all of the sort of theme words that appeal to investors. If you go and tell them, they'll be like, fine, right? Like what? Why should I take this? Like, what's in it for me? And उनको यही चमकता है कि how do I make money? मेरे लिए पैसा बनने वाला है और how can I save money, right? And drilling down to this truth, gauging human emotion becomes very important. Knowing how much the other person is willing to pay is actually a lot more important. I think this was also discussed before. And I think if we fundamentally try to look at things in this manner, when we see that if you want to do something, if you want to sell something to someone, we try to say that, fine, if we were in that shoes, what would actually sort of matter? And this is easier said than done, and a lot of us tend to just sort of make the mistake and go with the flow. We tend to think by analogy and we try to convince ourselves that, fine, a lot of people are saying that this is correct, so it might just be correct, right? If this startup has raised XYZ $1 million, it might just be the right thing to do. And we don't try to say that, fine, what exactly is the customer thinking, right? Why would they buy your service and why would they sort of do what you're doing? And this is where, when you try to reason from the fundamentals and you get people to sort of believe in what you're doing, when you yourself are clear, right, about the vision, I think that becomes very, very essential to sort of make sure that the decision making is correct. Just wanted to sort of end with a bit on some of the things that we are also doing on the one hand, and some of the sort of difficulties we're sort of facing when it comes to our business, which is essentially a SaaS-driven business. A lot of it was covered before. But this sort of fundamental thinking really appeals somehow to people, right? And when you want to go and sell something to someone, I believe that thinking from the bottom up, the simplest thing that somebody could relate with, if we try to reason up from there, ki, given that you want to achieve this, right, why don't you use the solution to do something? I think that usually tends to work. So yeah, that's about it. That's sort of what I wanted to discuss on data-driven decision making and trying to reason up from the bottom, trying to get people to believe in that vision, in that reason, and then reasoning up from there and trying to get things done. Thank you.